There's The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, Love Island, The Real Housewives of practically every city you've ever heard of. More than 30 years after the reality TV genre really got going, it's stronger than ever. So what is it about reality TV that keeps us coming back for more? I talked to Cathie James, co-president of Proper Television and executive producer and showrunner of MasterChef Canada, among other shows, and Sarah Krichel, associate editor at the Tyee, about finding escape in reality TV when reality itself is hard to handle. Cathie, Sarah, welcome to the program. How are you guys doing?
Great. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
There are two types of entertainment watching that's on the rise, reality TV, and then we have nostalgia TV and films. I want to start with reality first. Cathie, what do you think people are looking for when they're watching, perhaps binging, in my case, reality TV?
Well, I don't know actually that reality TV is on the rise. I think that it is like a 25-year-old genre now, and that I think that I don't even think of it necessarily as popular. I think of it as entrenched in the entertainment world and in our culture. But there's certainly certain shows that are doing extremely well and are in the zeitgeist, and I understand that you're a fan of one of those.
I am, Selling Sunset.
Guilty. I also watch it.
Okay, good.
Also guilty.
So what are we looking for when we're watching these shows?
I think that everybody's looking for something different. I think the way that I might watch it as a producer of unscripted television might be a little different than the way that you two watch it. So I'd like to turn it back to you two, because as the producer, it's really interesting for me to hear what you like about it.
Okay, well, Sarah, you had written an article about your Selling Sunset habit, and you wrote, more than anything, its outsized opulence drowns out the many moments when I'm uncomfortably confronted with the real-life wealth disparities all around me. I'm hoping you could take us through sort of your Selling Sunset journey, because it was sort of a love, maybe a love-love relationship, but sort of turns into a love-hate relationship. So for people who aren't familiar with Selling Sunset, what is the show? And then walk us through your journey.
Yeah, so Selling Sunset is kind of a softly scripted docu-soap series. It follows real estate agents who dress up in glamorous outfits, increasingly glamorous as the seasons go on.
Like a Tuesday is the Met Ball for them.
Oh, yes, let's be very clear. Yes.
Absolutely, and that's part of the fun, right? And yeah, they kind of they sell houses once in a while, but I think, you can't go 5 minutes without Krichel and Emma sitting on the edge of a multi-million-dollar mansion and talking about what happened at Girls Giving, which are the moments that I'm waiting for. And yeah, my journey with Selling Sunset, it truly was a journey. I remember texting friends being like, I have started the Selling Sunset journey because its popularity really exploded during the pandemic, because it first released in 2019. And yeah, I was kind of in one of two states while watching Selling Sunset. I was either, entrenched into the drama and into the psychoanalyses and into the funny, awkward moments, or, I was going through it and looking to absolutely turn my brain off. I think the moment that the fantasy sort of shattered a little bit for me was earlier this year in January, a new spin-off came out, which was Selling the City, which takes place in New York City. And I don't know, I kind of recognized, the exposed pipe and the pylons and the concrete jungle of New York City in my own city of Toronto. And I started to just feel like I was coming down to earth a little bit again. And yeah, the fantasy wasn't so much working anymore. And I kind of remembered, all the issues of housing unaffordability and the homelessness crisis and, people's inability to pay rent and buy groceries. So these people aren't that far off from us. They're around us.
Some people will talk about unscripted TV, reality shows as a form of escapism. And they may make some associations that it is, perhaps a bit lazy, some guilty pleasure watching. But these days, there's also this term of rot day. What is that?
Okay, so the rot day is basically when you are absolutely allowing yourself to be horizontal as long as you need to be, binge as many episodes guilt-free as you need to, have your favorite hot chocolate or tea or whatever it is you want, and kind of rest and lean into a level of rest that is considered radical these days. I think this is Gen Z's way. This trend is a reflection of our greater collective rejection against hustle culture and productivity culture, especially in a time when we're dealing with symptoms of, late stage capitalism and being exhausted from meaningless jobs and being increasingly isolated in our individual lifestyles of, working from home and perfecting our gym routine and watching our little prestige television show and then going to bed and doing it over and over again. And I think it's kind of a reflection of our lack of community and our lack of touch with a purpose and fulfillment in our generation. That's not for everybody. Rot days are beautiful and healthy and necessary. But yeah, I think it's a reflection of a greater problem sometimes.
Cathie, I want your take on this as someone, as you mentioned, who makes this television, not selling Sunset, but if we're mentioning shows, the Great Canadian Bake Show, MasterChef Canada, we've got Listing Large, which is a real estate show. So listening to what Sarah has to say, is that something that is in your brain thinking about when you're producing some of these shows?
Well, I definitely want to create an enjoyable experience. I think that, all entertainment, whether it's reading or movies, is a form of escape. In the 19th century, people were scolded for reading too much. And now, it's interesting to think of a rot day where really you're just immersing yourself in more rot, because the cycle of reality TV and digital culture and acquisitiveness and aspiration is all cycled throughout the culture. You're not escaping it when you immerse yourself in Selling Sunset. You're actually embracing it. I think that, the interesting thing about reality television, and reality is a terrible way to talk about any form of entertainment, even documentary. Nothing is real once you edit it and contracted into an hour or 2 hour package. But I think that what's interesting about unscripted television is that it is actually can be highly authentic within a very constructed package. And when it works, even with something as contrived as Selling Sunset, where, as you mentioned, women are dressed, to go to, for a black tie party when they're going to show a house at 3 in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's absurd. That show is shot and lit, and the participants, even though they are real people, behaving and acting as themselves in their own lives, it is all fully produced in a way that most unscripted television isn't, because frankly, we don't have the budget for that.
Right.
But what I would say is that, reality TV works, or unscripted television works, even on Selling Sunset, because despite all the contrivance, it gets at something that people are connecting to.
I'm hoping you can pull the curtain for us a little bit. In terms of considering casting for shows that you work on, what makes a good character?
It really depends on what you're going for.
Give us an example, for sure.
Well, for the Great Canadian Baking Show, I think that for some culinary shows, because the objective of that particular show is that this is going to change your life, we want to see people sort of battle it out. We want to see, some conflict, which might actually mimic an authentic environment on the line at a high-end kitchen. We may cast for a mix of personality and cooking skill. For something like the Great Canadian Baking Show, obviously we look for people who Canadians are going to love. We look at how we represent the country as a whole, geographically, demographically, but you really, really need to be a great baker. I mean, for that particular show, that audience wants to see people who are artists, and we spend a great deal of time talking to them, testing them, and interviewing them to get a sense of their skill level. For something like Listing Large, which was a group of real estate agents based in I think the northern part of Toronto, it was anchored by a on-again, off-again couple that ended up coming together and getting married and having 2 kids at the end of the show. I mean, thank God for that, because that real life thing that was happening really drove the story of the show. But, it was against the background of beautiful Toronto real estate. But, they would not have had the chance to have their lives on camera if they weren't also extraordinarily good looking and very charismatic.
Right, that all plays in. I want to pick up on sort of the competition aspect of it. We see this even in dating shows. We can name a bunch of them, but what is it about sort of upping the ante that has created, or does it create a higher viewership when there is something at stake?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think, there's 2 kinds of stakes in my view, in my experience, either consuming these kinds of stories or even trying to write them sometimes. I think there's the external stakes, which is, are they gonna, in the case of Selling Sunset, are they gonna sell this $1 million mansion? Is my client who wants to sell his house for $75 million gonna be mad at me if I don't sell his house for an exorbitant amount of money? And then there's the internal stakes, there's the characters that we come to know and love. I think Krichel has become such a fan favorite on that show, and she kind of has a perfect narrative to contribute in a space where we see a lot of wealth, a lot of opulence. She kind of has this experience with homelessness, and it kind of aligns with a lot of viewers' values around the American dream and getting out of a tough situation, and that it is possible to aspire to be like and look like the people who are on our screens. And it is fantasy, but it kind of does get to you on that subconscious level. So yeah, I think upping the stakes like that, both externally and emotionally, is what makes us connect to it so much, as Cathie said.
With that connection, there's also a community that is built on social media, perhaps, for example. But how might, and I'll bring back the rot, but how might that be costing? Is there a cost to it in sort of real life community when we are watching shows like this?
I think so. I thought a lot about this with my own journey with Selling Sunset and its spin-off shows. I got really into it, and like I mentioned earlier, there was a time when I gave myself a rot day, but it wasn't a great rot day. It was one of those days where I think I binge watched one too many episodes. And I started to kind of question, if I wasn't constantly chasing the comfort of reality television, I might be facing the uncomfortable and discomfort of my actual reality. And if I was present with that more, if I wasn't so avoidant with it, and if we didn't have the urge to constantly run to this, no shortage of entertainment that we have these days, what would we be doing instead? And I started to question, who might I be, or what sort of, what ways would I get to know myself more, and what ways would I maybe get to know my own values more and even pour those values into action, whether that's community organizing or just showing up for my next door neighbor, or thinking more clearly about what I want to spend my very little extra time doing. Yeah.
Very quickly, before I get to my last question to you, what do you see in terms of the community that's built behind some of these shows? Some of these shows resonate with a lot of people. We talked just before we rolled about the Great Canadian Bake Off, just all the connection there. But what are you seeing from the community that you've sort of cultivated with these shows?
I think the fans really cultivate it themselves, and we don't have a lot of control over that, and it's a really interesting thing to see. And it's interesting on something like Selling Sunset. I think the stakes, supposedly, as you say, are about selling homes. I don't know that a lot of homes get sold.
I don't think there are.
I think the real stakes among those women, and why it is authentic, and it this is the authenticity I think that the audience relates to, is it is a blood match for social media popularity.
Right.
And so many of the things that play out on that show are really connected to what is going on behind the scenes in their social media.
All right. We have less than a minute. One question for both of you. I want to turn our attention to nostalgia. From TV to vinyl records and analog technology, we are seeing this being documented. We talk about Gen Zs. As a millennial, it's a nice little pulse check to see what the kids are up to and into these days, and we know that we're what's trending. But in tough times, it seems like everyone wants to go back to what they think as a simpler time, a simpler past. And I'm just curious, what is your go-to nostalgia or escape binge, perhaps, and why?
I've got to say Gilmore Girls.
Okay.
I am that person who went to journalism school and is still obsessed with that show. I mean, I watched Gilmore Girls, Saturday mornings or Sunday mornings on, I think it was the W channel with my mom. And when the episode got a little too inappropriate for my age and for my strict parents, my mom would change the channel if my dad was in the room. But that show is just quintessential comfort. It takes place throughout the beautiful seasons in this small town, and I watch it every single fall, and it just reminds me of, watching this show with hilarious banter and iconic, flawed characters every weekend with my mom and my sister, and yeah, it just hits every time. I don't know what to say. Every single fall, it never misses.
All right. Cathie, as someone who works in TV, I don't know, maybe I'm assuming that it's something, that you're watching, but perhaps it's something else that brings back some nostalgia, but also takes you back to simpler times.
The way that nostalgia is playing out for me lately is in the kinds of shows that we are developing. And one of the shows that I'm developing right now is a dating show that takes people back in time to a university campus in which they're immersed in basically a time capsule. And I think that it really, and it's interesting because it involves people like Gen Xers going back to an 80s college campus. But when I talk to younger people, they love the idea because the idea of dating and having community
Connection,
and
yeah.
meeting people in an analog world really plays into this nostalgia for a simpler time.
All right, we are going to leave it there. We will keep our eyes out for that show.
Fingers crossed.
All right, Cathie, Sarah, thank you so much. Really appreciate your insights.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure.